An NBA championship, probably the greatest award that any player could have in all of sports, especially the NBA. Every player, from the time they set foot on the NBA court, dreams of one day being able to hold up that Larry O'Brien trophy. It doesn't matter if it's a role player or a star player. I guarantee you every single player would trade all of the personal accolades and achievements for just being able to hold up that Larry O'Brien trophy at the end of the season one time. That way they know that they had the best team in all of the league that year. But as we know, every player is not able to accomplish such feat. I mean, for every winner there is a loser, and there can only be one champion at the end of every season. So it's virtually impossible for every single player in NBA history to be able to capture a championship. And if you're a star player in the NBA or the best player on your team, if you are unable to capture one of these, it gets pretty rough for you. You see, star players are held to a different standard. I mean, you're the best of the best, one of the best players in all of the NBA. So of course, the expectation for you is to lead your team all the way to the championship, at least once in your career. But not every player is able to do that. And players who haven't been able to do that, like Allen Iverson, they kind of have a huge stain on their career. And they are criticized for this every single time their career accolades are brought up. We hear it all the time with players of this caliber. AI's biggest knock on his career is that he doesn't have a ring. Before LeBron was able to capture his first ring, everybody was saying, how can he be the best player in all of the NBA if he hasn't gotten a ring yet and he's been there so many times? Before Giannis got his first championship a couple years ago, that was his biggest knock as well. He's a 2-time MVP, 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, but he doesn't have a ring. So when being a player of this caliber, winning a ring means more. And with it meaning more, there's also a lot of pressure on these types of players. Recently, First Take, or Stephen A specifically, came out with a list detailing players that he believes have the most pressure on them to win a championship. Now the list itself is pretty wild, and I definitely have some critiques about it, but with this list coming out, I think it is interesting, and in this video, I'd like to point out players that I believe have the most pressure on them to win a championship. It doesn't have to be this year, but I mean, at least get one before your career is over, right? But first, let's get to Stephen A's list. At number 5, he had Kawhi Leonard. At number 4, he had Nikola Jokic. At number 3, he had Jason Tatum. At number 2, he had James Harden. And at number 1, he had Chris Paul. Now, this is a very wild list. And he started off wild too by putting Kawhi Leonard at 5. I mean, are we forgetting that Kawhi Leonard is a 2-times champion and a 2-times final MVP? I mean, come on now, what are we doing? I get saying the Clippers themselves have pressure on them to win the championship. I mean, they are one of the deepest teams in all of the NBA, and they have 2 of the best players in the league. But Kawhi himself, he's stamped in this league. He's done everything you can ask him to do except for winning the MVP. Now, the next one at 4 is Nikola Jokic, and I understand this fully, and I kind of agree with it a little bit. You see, Jokic could be a 3-time MVP this season. That's something that we haven't seen since Larry Bird. And with this possibility, the discourse around him being a 3-time MVP with no championship is going to get very nasty. But the reason why I don't disagree with it all the way is because look at his championship runs. It seems like somehow, some way, something has always gotten in his way. In 2020 was LeBron, and last year he was missing 2 of his best co-stars. But we have seen some bad performances from Jokic in the playoffs. I mean, just last year when the defending champs played against him, all they did was put him in pick and roll and force him to make decisions, something that he struggled with a lot. But I don't think he should get too much criticism for his lack of a championship. He has put in some very, very challenging situations. I think we should wait until he has all of his pieces next to him before we can really judge him on whether or not he has won the championship. Third was Jason Tatum, and I don't understand this one at all. Now, when watching this video and hearing Stephen A's logic, it makes sense and it's understandable. He talked about how last year in the finals, Jason Tatum put up a stinker, which he did, but Jason Tatum just reached this level, and I don't think it's fair to say he has a ton of pressure on him after one finals run. He's kind of just now really starting to tap into that All-NBA MVP caliber potential of his, and I think it's unfair, especially with the way the Celtics are just now starting to peak and become one of the best teams in the NBA, to put all this pressure on him to win the championship. He has plenty of time. but we could revisit this in a couple of years. Now, second on this list was James Harden. Now, this one I kind of agree with a little bit. You see, it's a double-edged sword with James Harden. In the playoffs, he has had some bad performances, although not as bad as people make them out to be. They have been bad, but he is one of the best players in all the NBA, and he has yet to get a championship, and some could argue that this is due to his own poor play in the playoffs. But one thing we can't leave out with James Harden is how the past couple years have gone for him. The past 2 years he's been out with a hamstring injury. In 2020 he had Russell Westbrook on his team, and before that, yes, he was in the midst of his prime and he was dominating. But think about some of the things he had to face. In 2018, when they were the closest they were to beating the Warriors, his co-star Chris Paul gets injured. And he also had to face the greatest dynasty of all time. We have to cut him some slack, but I definitely will say there is some pressure on him to win eventually. And number one on Stephen A's list was Chris Paul. And this one is understandable as well, but I really don't agree with it at all. Now, this year is Chris's best opportunity to win the championship. He has Devin Booker and Kevin Durant on his roster. I mean, at this point, especially with how he's aging, it's kind of do or die. With this being said though, I definitely don't think he has the most pressure to win the championship. Not right now. I mean, in the playoffs, Chris Paul has always been good. He's had a few questionable performances here and there, but most of the time when they lose, he either goes up against a team that's simply better than him, or he faces some bad luck. And I definitely don't think that he's worth being named as the player with the most pressure on him to win the title. It was an interesting list. I personally didn't like it, but I can see the logic behind some of it. But there are definitely some players that Stephen A missed out on that I would like to highlight. The first one being Joel Embiid. I mean, think about this. This is a guy who in the past 2 seasons has been dominating. He's been top 2 to 3 in MVP conversations, and he's arguably the best center in the league. Yet, he hasn't sniffed the NBA Finals. He hasn't even made it to the conference final. He comes up short time and time again, and you can kind of tell that as the playoff goes on, he starts to wane off a little bit. So I definitely believe a player like Joel should be on here. Another interesting name to put out there is Kevin Durant. I mean, Kevin Durant has some finals already like Kawhi, but the difference between them two is KD got both of his while being part of the greatest dynasty of all time. One of the biggest critiques in KD's career so far is the fact that he hasn't won outside of the Warriors, especially since last year with the Warriors winning the title, it made KD look even worse, and that Brooklyn situation didn't help him at all either. So I definitely think that KD has a ton of pressure on him as well to win the title without the Warriors. That's the biggest knock on his career right now, and that's really one of the only things that is holding people back on putting him in certain conversations. He's already one of the greatest players we've seen, one of the greatest scorers we've seen, but that lack of a ring outside of that dynasty is something that's going to be held over him until he actually gets the ring, if he gets it. Now, there are some other names you could throw out there like Jimmy Butler or Paul George, or shoot, some people might even throw Russell Westbrook in there, but I wouldn't do that. But let me know what y'all think in the comments. Are there any players I left out? Are there any players that I mentioned that you really don't agree with? If so, let me know in the comments and give me a reason why. And if you like this video, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. I make videos like this all the time. But that's all I got for right now. Until next time, peace.